For nearly a year, William and Diane Powell have been trying to establish the chain of events in the weeks before their youngest son died from a rare disease. He died of Addison's disease, a hormone deficiency problem which has been treatable since the 1950s. But first, it has to be diagnosed, and it's extremely rare in children. The parents want to know why their son, 10-year-old Robert Powell, died although 5 different doctors saw him on 7 occasions in the last 2 weeks of his life.
I just want justice done.
You want to know what really happened?
What really happened, yeah. And the truth.
Do you think you'll ever get that?
I don't know. But if it takes till I die or my husband dies, we'll go on and on and on until we do get justice.
The Powells live in the upper Swansea Valley at Ystrad Gunlais. They and nearly everyone else in the town are patients of the group of GPs who operate from the local health centre. The circumstances of Robert's death last Easter have left a number of unanswered questions.
Until these answers are given, the credibility professionally of the practice here was compromised not only in the eyes of the Powells, but in the eyes of the people of Ystrad Gunlais.
Ystrad Gunlais is a close-knit community which is more of a village than a town. Robert went to the local primary school until 2 weeks before his death. His 2 brothers had also been pupils there, and he was the youngest of the 3. He was a cheerful boy with a range of friends that sometimes surprised his parents.
Well, he was a very happy boy. Had lots of friends. He's always used to be singing everywhere he went. He not only had friends of his own age, but he had friends 2-3 times his age. Sometimes we could be walking on the road and Robbie'd say hello to somebody that I didn't know of, but he always knew somebody, Robbie. He was a very happy child.
But in December 1989, Robert Powell became ill. He was so ill that he was referred to Morriston Hospital in Swansea by one of the health centre doctors. He spent 4 days in hospital, and his parents were alarmed by how weak he'd become.
When we arrived at hospital, they told us that Robert had dehydrated. They put him on an intravenous drip, and he was very seriously ill.
What happened then?
Well, he was on the drip for, I think, 3 or 4 days. When we were leaving, he was out. He was discharged on the 12th of December 1989. And they told us that they didn't tell us. We asked what was wrong with him. And they said he had gastroenteritis caused through a throat infection.
But when Mrs. Powell took Robert back in January to Morriston Hospital for a checkup, the boy's improved condition impressed the consultant paediatrician, Dr. Forbes.
He couldn't get over Robbie. He said he wouldn't have recognised him because he looked so well and he put so much weight on. He then started to say how worried he was about Robbie when he first came in. And I said to him as well, I said, was it gastric enteritis caused through a throat infection? And he said, yes. And he said, but I'm not going to do nothing to him, he said. He said, I don't want to see him anymore. He said, I'm referring him back to the GPs.
Robert was discharged from hospital care and came home. Friends remarked that he had a tanned appearance that winter. They didn't realise it was one symptom of the disease which eventually killed him. At his school's St. David's Day celebration last year, the last picture of Robert before his death was taken. A month later, on April the 1st, he complained of a sore throat and a sore jaw. And because of his previous illness, his father next day took him to the health centre. They saw Dr. Elwyn Hughes, the partner who'd originally referred Robert to hospital the previous December. Dr. Hughes examined Robert on Monday, April the 2nd, without reference to his previous medical records.
Just told him the symptoms, what happened. I also reminded him that he was in fact the doctor who had admitted the boy to hospital. He then no doubt remembered and looked at Robert, checked Robert over and told me there was nothing wrong with him. He couldn't find nothing wrong, any symptoms he had. He said, I can't find anything wrong, not to worry about it.
The next morning, the Powells sent Robert to school. 3 days later, a teacher sent him home, saying he appeared to be quite poorly in class. Mr. Powell took Robert for a second visit to the health centre. This time, they saw another of the GPs from the group practice. Dr. Nicola Flower saw Robert on Friday, April the 6th.
But she said she couldn't find anything wrong with him. And she wasn't worried about him. His health, he seemed to be in good health.
Did she suggest at that time that she was aware of any problems that the consultant at the hospital might have informed the doctors about?
Nothing at all. And she admits again she didn't read the medical records.
Because Robert was weak and vomiting, his mother was worried. She insisted on a further visit to the surgery to see yet another doctor. Dr. Mike Williams saw Robert and his parents on Wednesday, April the 11th.
So the both of us went to Dr. Williams because she wanted to hear for herself what was happening, because we were concerned about obviously the admission to hospital in December. He said he couldn't find anything wrong with him, but because he'd been vomiting, he gave diarrhea. Looked in the medical records, read them, told us I'm going to refer him straight back to Dr. Forbes. Although we can't see anything wrong with him, the boy's obviously ill.
Over the next 4 days, in the judgment of his parents, Robert's condition was steadily getting worse. He could not eat and was vomiting froth. By now it was the Easter holiday weekend, and when they called the health centre for help on the Sunday, they were asked to go to the local community hospital to see a GP. The doctor they went to see was Dr. Paul Bolatz. Dr. Bolatz saw Robert on Easter Sunday, April the 15th. He said Robert should have a blood test at the surgery after the holiday.
We got him in, he looked at the boy, examined him, found a throat infection, prescribed medicine for Robert's infection. While he was writing the prescription out, Robert was so weak he had to lie on the bed, which Dr. Bolatz admits he remembers the boy was weak and he had to lie in the bed. He also remembers that I had to carry the boy from the car, from the hospital to the car.
Next day, Robert was worse, and the Powells called Dr. Keith Hughes out to the house. Dr. Keith Hughes examined Robert on Easter Monday. He went to his car to fetch a blood sugar test kit, but the kit was out of date and could not be used. The test might have given a clue that something was wrong.
He thought at that time there's a possibility that Robert would have to go into hospital. If he didn't keep his fluids down or his condition deteriorated, then I was to phone him back and he would admit Robert to hospital. The part I can't understand is, if he felt Robert was that ill, why didn't he call back? Why did he leave my wife and I judge my son's illness?
In a fortnight, 5 different doctors had seen Robert Powell. So far, the parents believed a number of things. Only one doctor had consulted the boy's medical records, which gave at the very least the suspicion of a complication. He'd told the parents he was referring Robert back to the hospital consultant. Another doctor had promised the parents a blood test, but after Easter. Another had offered a blood sugar test, but the kit was out of date. None of these had been done. By Tuesday, April the 17th, Robert's parents became desperate about his condition.
He wanted to go to the toilet. I picked him up from bed because he was so weak. I had to hold him up, took him to the bathroom, and as I took him in, he collapsed on the floor. And I screamed for Billy, and I held his head up, and when Billy came up, his eyes were closed. And Billy looked at him and he came straight back down to phone for the doctor.
Dr. Nicola Flower answered Mr. Powell's call and came to the house at 3:30 that Tuesday afternoon.
So I asked again to have Robert admitted to hospital. She said, there's no need. There's no need for the boy to go to hospital. And I said, well, why did Keith Hughes say if he gets any worse yesterday, or if he vomits, that you should go in? Oh no, there's no need at all. There's no need for the boy to go to hospital. I said, well, why is he fainted? Why is he, he couldn't walk. Oh, this is because he'd been lying in bed all week. And that's all she told me, and she just went out the house.
The parents were so worried, Mr. Powell called the hospital and spoke to the nurse on Robert's former ward.
She told me, look, Mr. Powell, if the GP has just been there, you've got to believe in your GP. If you're bringing your son down to the hospital now, you'll have to go through casualty. You really should have a doctor to refer the boy in. But if you're at all worried, phone her up again.
So they did, and Dr. Flower returned to the Powell's home at 5:30 on Tuesday, April the 17th.
She comes storming in the house. She comes in with marches upstairs to Robert. Tell him he's got abdominal pain. Oh, can't find nothing wrong, he's okay, there's no need. I said, what do you mean? I mean, the boy's seriously ill. I said, he should go to hospital. No, there's no need for that child to be in hospital. I said, Dr. Flowers, how do you expect me to take this boy down to your health centre tomorrow for blood tests? He can't walk. I said, look at my wife, she's in a hell of a state. Look at the state we're in because we're so worried about her. Or to put your wife's mind at rest, we'll send him in.
She started writing the referral note to the hospital. And as she was finishing it off, my husband came downstairs and he asked her if she'd had an ambulance. And she just threw the note across like that. She said, no, she said, taken by car. She never even waited to see Robbie coming down, to see if we were okay. She just walked out that house, out of this house. The impression she gave me as if I was an over-anxious mother.
They drove down to the hospital with Robert. The staff soon realised his condition was serious and began frantic efforts to revive him. Mrs. Powell fainted and was taken to a restroom. Mr. Powell was asked to leave the treatment room.
I asked then if Robert, could I see Robert? Yes, he's on the bed waiting for the scan. So Diane and I went to see him. Robert's eyes were the exact same as they were when I'd seen him earlier on. And his body had gone a yellowish colour. Like a golden yellow, very yellow. And I looked at him and we just said, so long, and I hope you'll be okay in the scan and whatever. And then we left Robert there and he was taken for a scan. We were in the waiting room. By this time the mother-in-law had arrived. My brother had been informed he had arrived. Within a short period of time, the doctor came in and said, Mr. Powell, I'm very sorry, Robert has died. Which was,
Mr. Powell offered his son's organs for transplant, but was told by a hospital doctor that they could not be used. He gave permission for a post-mortem examination and the couple returned home. Meanwhile, tests were done to establish the cause of the boy's death. The death certificate said Robert died from Addison's disease. This is an adrenal insufficiency, basically a hormone problem which stops the body fighting disease. It's rare, very rare in children, but can be detected after a standard procedure called an ACTH test. A week after the death, Dr. Keith Hughes came to see Mr. Powell at his home. He brought with him Robert's medical records, which Mr. Powell examined.
As soon as I opened them, the first thing I read at the top of a page, information, needs ACTH test, parents informed. Well, since he died, I'd heard of Addison's, obviously, and I heard there was a hormone problem, and ACTH was a hormone test. So I got a bit annoyed, and I said, well, Christ, I said, it says he needs a test, why didn't he have it? Well, he said, that was a hospital test. And I was obviously annoyed because there was things in the medical record I knew nothing about. That one said that we were informed. There's also a discharge note that says information given to relative needs ACTH test, which I hadn't been informed. And if I had been informed, Robert would be alive now.
In the records Mr. Powell eventually obtained, there are documents which say Robert needed an ACTH test. There's also a letter from Dr. Forbes saying there was a question of adrenal insufficiency, a hormone problem, but it may have been severe gastritis, and he'd see him again if there were any recurrent episodes. That letter does not mention Addison's disease, but Mr. Powell is sure he saw one letter which did. He was so concerned he asked a local clergyman to inspect the records.
And I do remember two pieces of paper, two letters, one of a form type and the other a letter. And the one referred very clearly to Addison's disease and to the problem, a potential problem of hormonal imbalance, and also the need for an ACTH test.
William Powell decided to go to Morriston Hospital himself to see Dr. Forbes, who treated Robert 5 months before. He wanted to find out if the hospital had at that time suspected the boy might have Addison's disease.
Dr. Forbes said, yes, before I even asked him, look, we're awfully sorry. We suspected Robert of having the hormone problem. We expected him of having Addison's disease, but because he was so well, he hadn't done the test, and that he'd referred them back to the GPs. But when I told him the story about Robert and the amount of GPs that Robert had seen in the 17 days of his illness, he was shaking. He said, as I was telling him, he was shaking with disbelief.
Mr. Powell was disturbed by a number of differences between the hospital's medical records and those held by the local health centre. He began a painstaking check of all the evidence and paperwork he could gather. He focused on the decision of Dr. Mike Williams on April 11th, 6 days before Robert died, who recommended a further referral to a consultant.
On their own admission, the only doctor that read my son's medical records when he was alive was Dr. Mike Williams, who after reading them on the 11th of April said he's going to refer him that day, but he didn't do it.
Mr. Powell could not find any referral letter. Eventually, 2 copies turned up in the health centre records. He pieced together what had happened. Dr. Williams had said he would refer Robert on April 11th. Robert died on the 17th. Mr. Powell learned that the letter was typed on the 19th, but dated April the 12th so that the notes would appear chronologically correct. Mr. Powell asked Dr. Forbes if he'd ever received a letter.
I asked him if he'd received a referral letter from Dr. Mike Williams. He said no. I'd received no referral letter. I only had a phone call the day after Robert died.
In May, Mr. Powell made a complaint about his son's treatment. It was placed before a tribunal of the GP's supervisory body. The rules do not allow complainants to take a lawyer to the hearing. So Mr. Powell chose a friend as an advisor to prepare for the hearing.
We spent 4 days prior to the hearing going through all the evidence of the doctors and listing up our questions so the doctors, rather than baffle us with complicated answers, should only have been able to answer yes or no. And if they answered yes, there was a second question lined up following that train, or if they answered no, there was a backup question to clarify specific matters.
The tribunal met here last December. It was a service committee of the Family Health Services Authority, which oversees local GPs, and met in private. It consisted of a chairman, 2 lay members, and 2 medical members. The 5 doctors were allowed a professional representative.
It's hard enough to go up against someone like a doctor with a professional advisor beside him than to stand up with 5 against you and an advisor with him. I mean, their advisor was a Mr. McEwen from the Medical Protection Society. Obviously, he's got medical knowledge and knowledge of the hearings. He's obviously doing them before. I've never been to one, and hope to God I never get put through the same thing again.
Mr. Powell felt intimidated by the chairman. The Family Health Services Authority has since refused to say who the chairman was.
Instead of helping him through it, the man verbally attacked him. And William said, well, I didn't understand. My level of education isn't particularly high. The chairman told him, your level of education is of no concern to me. You have to listen the first time and understand.
Mr. Powell called the Reverend Thomas as a witness to what he'd seen in the medical records.
I had the feeling the whole thing was dominated by the chairman, who, as I say, not to put a finer point on it, was at least brisk and I thought completely unfeeling.
The committee decided that no action should be taken against Dr. Elwyn Hughes, Dr. Mike Williams, Dr. Paul Bolatz and Dr. Keith Hughes. The committee warned Dr. Nicola Flower to conform with the terms of her service.
So as far as I can see, 4 get off altogether and 1 was told to conform to her terms of contract. Even although my son has died and possibly she could have saved his life, she's just been told to conform to the terms of contract. Now I don't call that justice.
Thank you. The family wondered what to do next. Mr. Powell, who's unemployed, had been fighting his case without professional help. He decided to seek legal advice, and his work so far impressed the solicitor.
I think Mr. Powell has been very persistent and has gone further in the face of what might be seen as quite difficult hurdles. He's taken it a good deal further than other people in the same situation might have done.
He advised Mr. Powell to consider a claim for medical negligence. That could be pursued through a civil court paid for with legal aid. But there would be a maximum limit on the bereavement damages of £3,500.
My advice to him has been that there are certainly grounds for looking into a claim in medical negligence. As a byproduct of that, we will be involving independent experts. Once we have got to the stage of having independent expert advice, I'll be in a position to advise him as to his real chances of success. But at the moment, my view is that there are certainly grounds for investigating a claim.
He also advised Mr. Powell to appeal to the Welsh office against the committee's finding that 4 of the doctors had not broken their contract. But legal aid is not available and he's doing it on his own. The doctors could hire a barrister through their defence organisations. Mr. Powell asked his MP to press for an appeal.
On an immediate basis, I've written to the Secretary of State asking that the whole procedure which the Welsh office are now carrying out should be speeded up very much indeed, because a great deal of heartache has been created as far as the Powell family is concerned. The system appears to be loaded against those people who are genuinely trying to get to the bottom of a series of events which unfortunately have beset their lives. And it's the objectivity of the exercise which really concerns me.
None of the doctors involved wanted to take part in this programme. Dr. Forbes at Morriston Hospital said he had no comment. Dr. Paul Bolatz, Dr. Keith Hughes, Dr. Elwyn Hughes and Dr. Mike Williams are represented by a solicitor. He said, "My clients greatly regret Robert's death, but nevertheless they are firmly of the view that the West Glamorgan Family Health Services Authority at its service committee were entirely right in deciding that they had provided all necessary and appropriate medical services for Robert. Whilst the Secretary of State is considering the matter, it is not appropriate for my clients to comment further." Dr. Nicola Flower did not reply to our invitation to take part.
I want to have justice done. I don't want other parents to go through what me, my husband and my family have gone through. It's been very hard 10 months for us. It's very hard, Robbie dying without all this going on as well.